And for analysis on the fall of Syria's government to insurgents, we speak to Avi Melamed. He's a former Israeli intelligence official and a senior official on Arab affairs. Avi, thank you for joining our program. The big question right now is what comes next? Will there be a resurgence of ISIS now that there's somewhat of a vacuum?
Well, good morning. That is one of the concerns. Obviously, right now, the situation in Syria is very dramatic, volatile, sort of speaking. There are different groups running around right now out there. There is a lot of weapon out there. And one of the concerns is that, as you said, ISIS will try to take advantage of the opportunity and establish its control or its presence in the center, particularly center part of Syria. So right now, when we look at the whole situation in Syria, this is definitely one of the scenarios that we have to look at.
So what are some of the other scenarios that are possible, given that there is just so much uncertainty?
Well, one scenario is that the situation will be stabilized, and the Syrian rebels that, by the way, are coming from, though they have some common denominators, they do have some differences between them and among themselves. So one scenario is that they will be able to stabilize the situation in Syria and to start move forward, rebuilding, reestablishing, and so on. This is one scenario. The other scenario is that we will watch an inner fight between the different rebel groups, because, as I said before, they have some major differences between them, including ideological perspectives. One another scenario that we may see in Syria is that the jihadist-like groups that operate in Syria will try to start initiating violence against Israel in the area of the Golan Heights. So there are different scenarios, and I think that each and every one of those scenarios have to be taken seriously. It's not necessarily to say that this is exactly what will happen, but we definitely should look at different scenarios when we look right now at the situation in Syria and looking down the road.
There are a lot of unknowns surrounding this, and Senator Ben Cardin, he's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he's talking about the chemical weapons supplies that were purportedly belong to Assad, and he's calling on the international community to make sure to go in to secure those, to make sure they don't fall into the wrong hands. More to comment on that if you want, or we could talk about Israel's involvement in that region, the border region between the Golan Heights and Syria, and how they're trying to create stability there. Will they be able to keep peace on that front?
Well, indeed, you mentioned the issue of the chemical weapons. There is also the issue of the more strategic weapon, like, long-range missiles and stuff like that in Syria. One of the things that Israel has been doing constantly in parallel to the downfall of Assad regime is that Israel is basically taking out all those locations that stores those kind of weapons, particularly when we talk about weapons like chemical weapons. So definitely one of the things that Israel is doing is to make sure, or try to do as much as possible to make sure that this weapon will not fall to anyone's hand. And as you mentioned, also in parallel to that, Israel is operating in the Golan Heights. In the Golan Heights, since the war between Israel and Syria in 1973, there has been a ceasefire agreement following that war in 1974. And according to that ceasefire, the Golan Heights has kind of like a dividing zone between the two sides. Israel, basically following the downfall of Assad regime, announced that this dividing zone is no longer relevant, and rightly so, because there is no regime in Syria that controls. And Israel rushed to basically took positions in areas in the Golan Heights inside this dividing zone, including the highest peak of the Hermon mountain on the Syrian side.
Thank you for that in-depth analysis on that, Avi. Let's talk about Iran's purported axis of resistance. Syria is claimed to be part of that, and geographically it's on the way when Iran arms Hezbollah in Lebanon through Syria. And also, the Iranian regime has boasted to its people that, oh, we have a strong network around us in the region, and that's why you should be more welcoming to us. But these protests, these anti-government protests in Iran said, hey, you spent tens of billions of dollars propping up the Assad rule, and now that's collapsed. So there's probably going to be some internal conflict within Iran, would you say?
Well, it's possible. As you said, and accurately, Iran spent dozens of billions of dollars in the last year, particularly saving Assad rule in Gaza Strip. What happened to Iran, roughly speaking, is that in the last year, and particularly in the last 2 weeks, the huge infrastructure that Iran built, that is known by the name of the axis of resistance, as you mentioned, and the land corridor, namely a land corridor stretching from Iran through Iraq, through Syria to Lebanon, a land corridor that only just not so long ago was under actually under Iranian influence, where the Iranians were streaming through this corridor weapons and militants crossing from Iraq to Syria and Lebanon, all that infrastructure basically collapsed. So the Iranians today, of course, are facing a very challenging situation. Their flag program, so to speaking, is just falling apart in front of their eyes. And as you said accurately, given the fact that Iran is enormously struggling economically, all those billions and billions of dollars that have been spent on arming armies of terror and so on could have been spent for the people in Iran. We should remember that the issue of the spending those billions of dollars all those years always ignited the unrest and discontent among the Iranian people. People in Iran used to chant on the streets, "We don't want to die neither for Gaza or for Palestine or for Syria. We want to our needs to be addressed." So it's very possible that one of the things that will be a result of what we see right now is that it will further fuel already existing a very significant unrest and protest in Iran. We'll have to wait and see how things will evolve right there.
Well, thank you for this very informed perspective. Avi Melamed, former senior Israeli intelligence official and senior official on Arab affairs.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.